Demonic, a new horror film set in a digital simulation, used a new technology called volumetric capture to create its video game-inspired look.
250 cameras is compressed into one 3D object.
This is Neill Blomkamp, the director of Elysium, Chappie, and the groundbreaking District 9.
All of the science fiction films that I've done before have maybe a tinge of horror to them, and this horror film has a tinge of science fiction to it.
Let's walk through Neill's process of rolling 250 cameras all at once to create Demonic's simulated world.
So we travel into the mind of a person who's in a coma, and this experimental technology lets them get out of their body, which they don't have control over, into a virtual environment.
Why are you here?
It might feel like a video game, but in reality, it's a specific location in British Columbia. In fact, everything you see here was captured from real-life people and places, and digitized using the techniques of photogrammetry and volumetric capture. Here are the steps in bringing the simulation to life.
Google Earth is a good way to think of photogrammetry. If you look at cities in Google Earth in 3D, it's the exact same process. Those are just planes that are flying over cities and taking tens of thousands of photos. If you imagine walking around a house and taking 100 photos around the house, and then you would use drones to get things like what the roof surfaces would look like, and then you would do a tour through the inside of the house using handheld still shots. I mean, we were just using Canon Mark IIIs. If you give all of those photos, which are all still images, to a photogrammetry piece of software, it'll pull out a three-dimensional house. Its fidelity is a little bit low, so blades of grass and trees and stuff would be more like blobs, but it's still pretty good. You can see the tree on the left is left at a resolution level that I wanted to leave it at, which makes it look very computer generated. So now you have a 3D object that you can look at from any angle sitting on a computer monitor.
Although photogrammetry has been around a while, volumetric capture hasn't, especially not in filmmaking.
Volumetric capture is the idea of grabbing three-dimensional holographic video instead of two-dimensional video of a performance of actors at 24 times a second. So it's essentially a motion version of photogrammetry. So you're not locked into a single angle, you have like a three-dimensional stage play of their performance. So in the case of Demonic, if we have Carly and Natalie in the same room acting with one another, if you were to pause any frame in there, you could move around them in 3 dimensions because any individual one frame is a frozen 3-dimensional piece of geometry. Filming in volumetric capture is very taxing. It's a highly synthetic environment that is not great for actors. I mean, it's essentially a scaffold cage of cameras that are around them. We had 250 cameras, and you want those 250 cameras to be incredibly close to them. And then when you get to the front door, we would wheel in a plywood door that obscured her as little as possible, so it would just look like a skeleton of a door. And that would give her something to push open. If she goes upstairs, we'd bring in plywood stairs that she would go up. Instead of using VFX to lift up the mother in this demonic possession idea of just being levitated off the ground, you would normally use a bunch of computers to do that, but we actually just use traditional stunt rigging with wires to lift her out of the volumetric capture environment. If you imagine a video game character that you can turn around and look at from any angle, that is basically what you end up with.
One issue the production team ran into was wrangling all the data. Shooting in volumetric capture yielded about 12 terabytes per day.
My brother and I had to bring in 24 computers that we owned on the back of a pickup truck to be able to help get the data off, and then they would spend an additional 12 hours getting that data off of the cameras and clearing them for the next morning, and sort of by 7 a.m. being done with the day before.
Once the footage is finally ingested, computers go to work crunching all the camera angles into a 3-dimensional piece of geometry.
The first thing that you actually get is a point cloud. And when you zoom back from it, you can see it very clearly. When you zoom into it, all of the points become separate, like they're floating atoms. It's anywhere between an hour to several hours to compute one frame. You're doing, thousands of frames. It took months.
In fact, VFX artists, with the help of Unity, a game engine used to make games like Pokemon Go, Monument Valley, and Cuphead, had to create a custom workflow with enhanced processors in order to be able to render the enormous volumetric datasets into virtual reality, where the shots were then filmed.
You're basically dragging a 3-dimensional actor and placing them on the floor of your building that you've gathered, also using photogrammetry. So now it's like a video game. Now you can look at it from any angle, and you can light it any way that you want, and you can film it any way you want. You take that virtual camera existing in the scene on a computer, and you tell it that any motion that comes from this real handheld object in the real world with the monitor on it, which has motion capture points on it, those motion capture points, when the camera operator moves them, you tell the virtual camera in your scene to reference these motion capture points and move based on what the camera operator is doing. So as he pans right, your virtual camera will exactly mimic what he's doing. And then you take the video feed coming from the virtual camera and you pipe it to the monitor that he's looking through. So he's effectively now inside the computer looking at the scene. And so he can then walk around and frame shots.
There seems to be plenty of interlacing between the worlds of filmmaking and game design. Will the two disciplines merge in the future?
It seems to me where video game technology will go is in a direction of more and more photorealism on every level, like lighting, character, physics, and particle simulations. So it becomes an immersive world for the person playing the game. The idea of narrative in future gaming or future immersive worlds may take a backseat to allowing the gamer to just interact in the way that they want, like a Grand Theft Auto kind of open world. It's all about the agency of the gamer, where on the film side or the TV side, the whole point is to be a passive audience member. So you're sitting and being told a story, which is a very different experience. Film has spent 100 years refining what it does. The only way that I can see it really changing would be something like volumetric capture, where you could sit and watch the actors through VR. You could have conversations taking place between actors where you're sitting at the table with them. And it may be something that audiences find interesting and useful, and it may also not. It's hard to know where that will go. But I think the revolutions of how stories are told are basically quite locked in now. What we see now, I think, will be there for quite a few years.